MS Now's Michael Schnell is following this from Capitol Hill. Julie Roginski is a Democratic strategist and author of the Salty Politics newsletter on Substack. What do you think of this strategy, Julie? No mea culpa, but bless the media.
It's smart strategy politically. I mean, running against the media is never a bad idea, ever. I will say this. Look, I personally couldn't care less what's going on in his marriage. That's between him and his wife. If Mrs. Plattner doesn't care, Julie Roginski doesn't care. I am a little concerned about this drip of bad stuff that seems to be coming out about Plattner. And the reality is that, this is what happens when somebody doesn't have a real primary and doesn't really get vetted. Stuff tends to come out. And the problem for Plattner is a lot of the other stuff, including his SS tattoo. Those were things that he said happened 20 years ago, and he was under a lot of stress, and he was a PTSD and all this other stuff. That is okay, understandable. This is fairly new. This is something that happened in the last few years, and that's, I think, a little bit more complicated for him to explain. As a Democrat who wants Susan Collins defeated, I just hope there's nothing more. But at which point do Democrats have to look in the mirror and say, listen, we got to do a better job of vetting some of these people?
Yeah, and there's also a question that has been raised about hypocrisy, right? Like, if he were a Republican, what would the Democrats say about this? And vice versa. Let's be fair. Yeah. Sometimes you judge the person within your party a little differently than you might somebody from...
Well, I would hope that Susan Collins, who apparently didn't have much to say about the president with whom she votes all the time, every time he pumps up.
But this story isn't about her.
But it's not about her. But I would no. Listen, I'm not excusing this, and I completely agree with you that Democrats should not be hypocritical on this matter. What I'm suggesting to you is I think it's going to be tough for Republicans to. They're going to do it anyway, but I think it's a little hypocritical for Republicans to exploit this when Donald Trump is their president. I mean, he's not grabbing anybody by the you-know-what, Graham Plattner, as far as we know, at least, not yet.
I mean, to your point, though, his wife is not just standing behind him. She made a video and put that out there. So let's play a little bit of that.
I find it really shameful that there's a group of media outlets and people who are willing to spread gossip instead of talking about real issues that Graham is running on. Graham and I have a great marriage. Being married is hard. Being newly married is hard. Being newly married and going through infertility is hard.
I guess the question becomes, is this a referendum on their marriage, or is this a referendum on whether you think that that's disqualifying? And is that for every individual voter to decide?
It is for every individual voter to decide. As I said, I'm not a Maine voter. I have done campaigns up in Maine. It's a very, very unique place. Mainers are very, very jealous of their prerogative. They do not like the rest of us. They don't accept the rest of us and our judge. Tell them how to live and how to vote. Look, as I said, I personally don't care if Donald Trump cheated on Melania, and I don't care whether Graham Plattner had a sexting scandal that his wife doesn't care about. She seems to not really, it doesn't matter to her, so why should it matter to me? What concerns me, as I said before, is at which point do all of these drips stop, and what else is there to drop? And that's the part that we're all holding our breath about, and it's a little concerning.
Michael, we have gotten some reaction to all of this from sitting Democratic senators. What are we hearing?
Yeah, the senators want answers, Chris, and you alluded to this point earlier, but this is not just any old Senate race. This is what Democrats view as one of their top pickup opportunities as they try to chart their way back to the majority in the Senate. They see Susan Collins as a formidable candidate. She is somebody who has beat back challenges time and time again, and they need a strong candidate to fill the void to try to take on Susan Collins. And there are questions now if that is Graham Plattner. Look, there was the scandal about his unearthed social media post talking about sexual harassment. Then news of his tattoo that looked like a Nazi symbol came to light. And now there are these text messages. Democrats up on Capitol Hill, they want answers. Take a listen.
Yeah, I have concerns. That guy has questions to answer, and that's what campaigns are for.
With any campaign in the country, the character and the transparency about the different candidates is going to come out. That's part of a campaign. And the voters will decide what it is that they ultimately think in terms of their ability to trust those candidates.
He certainly admitted that he has made mistakes, but I think this is going to be a pretty clear contrast in Maine between somebody who has spent his life protecting us versus somebody who seems to be protecting Donald Trump's corruption.
Now, Chris, that's only 3 Democratic senators, certainly a number more who we want to hear from. For example, Chuck Schumer, the leader of Senate Democrats, Kirsten Gillibrand, she's the head of the Senate Democrats campaign arm, and then somebody like Bernie Sanders, who's a strong and key supporter of Graham Plattner. And one thing I'll note, as Plattner and his wife call this media gossip and sensationalized by the media, I spoke to Genevieve McDonald yesterday. She's the former Plattner aide who spoke to Graham Plattner's wife. When Graham Plattner's wife came forward with these text messages, she spoke to Genevieve McDonald. McDonald told me that the campaign tried to look at this as an election vulnerability, sort of giving credence to the idea that this could be a problem down the road. It's now coming to be that problem. What Mainers do about it and what the party does about it, that's what we're going to see unfold in the next coming days.